Hi, and welcome. Whatever led you to pick this podcast today, let me say I'm so glad you're joining me for this very meaningful conversation. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and here's what I know. We get to create our own social worlds through how we choose to communicate, how we act, and how we show up to one another. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck in patterns, I would say more often than not, and we're stuck because we think that that's just the way things are. But the truth is that we have a lot of choices. It's just about learning to see choices where we didn't see choices before. Like, how can we empower and educate ourselves? How can we equip ourselves with the knowledge, language, and ideas to build a better social world? What do we even want our better social world to look like? Today, we're continuing our conversation with Emma Nicholson and Dr. Chris Wells of the Positive Disintegration podcast. If you haven't listened to part 1 of our conversation, I suggest you go back and do that before listening to this one. When we last left off, Chris and Emma were explaining the theory of positive disintegration. And specifically, we were talking about the importance of understanding and valuing our emotions and putting work into developing emotional intelligence. Chris pointed out that this is challenging and, easier said than done because our society has tended to value intellect and logic more than emotions. But what could our social world look like if we valued both equally? And furthermore, Emma built off that idea to ask, what are the other values that drive us as a society? What guides us? And are they actually working for us? And what values do work for us? And how can we implement more of those in our lives? So remembering that that's where we stopped off, let's jump right back in. I want to maybe take this chance to break down the theory a little bit more. So I'm wondering if you can explain what is disintegration first, and then what is positive disintegration.
Well, interestingly, if you don't mind, I could give an example of my first major disintegration in terms of what we were just talking about.
Please, yeah.
The first time I ever fully had a disintegration that I would call like a global disintegration that really broke me down and nearly killed me. It was showing up in me feeling, because I would be at work, and at the time I worked at Barnes & Noble, just to give context, and I was 20 or maybe 21. And I went from being somebody who was I wish I could feel, I'm cut off from my feelings, to suddenly being at work and I would just be crying and tears would just be pouring down my face. I would have to go in the break room at work because I couldn't be on the floor with customers like that,
Right.
So what happened was I was breaking down, and it got to the point where I didn't have control anymore. And that was part of what was so terrifying about this process of disintegration, was suddenly realizing that the things that I had a tight grip on, I didn't have a grip on anymore, and so I was kind of falling apart. And, essentially that's what happens with disintegration. Everything that you knew about, this is who I am, starts breaking down. And you get to a point, or at least I did in that example, of just fully not knowing who I was. In myself is what I meant. When I say I didn't know who I was, I just didn't have a sense of my true self. I had been so disconnected from who I was. And then when it comes to the positive part, if we're staying with my story, I made 2 suicide attempts. And so it was nearly not a positive disintegration.
Right.
If I had succeeded in dying by suicide, that would have been it. And it would have been a disintegration that wasn't positive. But what made it positive is that I was able to rebuild after falling apart. But it took years. I mean, it would be wrong to say that it was any quick process by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that really it was a matter of going through many disintegrations and rebuilding over a process of years. But at least that's, in a nutshell, kind of how it looked in my life.
That's definitely helpful, and I appreciate you sharing that story. Maybe Emma has something to add too.
Yeah, so that that tracks with the theory and one of my experiences. So obviously the disintegration is that breaking down. And, you know, we're talking about who we think we are and our values. Like you get to the who am I? What is important to me? I don't know who I am anymore. So it's that breaking down. And as Chris said, it is a process and something that cycles through. So it's like a trend line on a graph. So if you think of a graph going, you know, doing that sort of up and down thing, if the overall progress is going up and the overall trend's going up, then it's positive.
Mm-hmm.
So you will go through sort of cycles of, you know, breaking down and rebuilding and breaking down and rebuilding. But as long as you are tracking towards a direction of growth, then that's positive. The dark night of the soul that I had before I stumbled across the theory was certainly like that. I'd started doing creative writing and found my authentic voice by accident.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to go, well, who am I? I don't know what, you know, everything I thought I knew about myself suddenly fell on its ass, to be quite frank. And I came out of this experience feeling like I'd been washed up on the shore of a beach after a shipwreck going, ugh, what has just happened to me? And that rebuilding process did take a long time. There was a lot of stuff to sort out, you know, a lot of my past to sort of work through, you know, things that you know, I'd been clinging on to, concepts about myself that weren't serving me anymore. And it was a long road. And Chris has talked about this is hard work. Yeah. So you will have ups and downs and keep going through it. And over a lifetime, you can have many disintegrations. Mm-hmm. But if you are rebuilding, if you are thinking about what is important to you and reestablishing your values, if you are doing the hard work on yourself, then you are moving positively. Mm. Doesn't feel positive.
Yeah, it seems very significant to make that distinction between not all disintegration is positive. But do you feel that that's more about you're in a state of disintegration and it's about what you do with it? Or is it still about what the disintegration like does to you? Are you in control of it or not, I guess?
Well, I think there's one way to help make sense of this, and that's, you know, Dabrowski saw two developmental processes, and one was unilevel and one was multilevel. And so what Emma and I were just talking about was more the multilevel type, where you're, you know, you're breaking down, you're rebuilding, it's trending mm-hmm. upward, it's a positive disintegration. But the unilevel kind of disintegration is not so clearly positive, and there may not be an easy way out of it. It's interesting because one of the things that I've noticed that I disagree with, there are people in the Dabrowski community who call unilevel disintegration a transition phase and imply that it's some brief experience and that if you stay in it, you know, it could lead to psychosis or suicide. And the reality is many people, I wouldn't say it's a transitional, you know, phase by any stretch. And I say this as somebody who had a parent who died from alcoholism. I would say that my father was in a unilevel disintegration for decades and that it killed him and that he never managed to find a way out of it. And so I think that there are a lot of people who suffer greatly in unilevel disintegration. And one of the things that makes it different from multilevel is that it doesn't have the level of consciousness and awareness that you see in multilevel. And so if you're just in autopilot mode and you're drinking every day and you're never really examining yourself or taking the risks to get out of that, then you could live in that state for a long time and it could kill you. And so that's kind of a difference between the two types. And that's kind of a more bleak view of how disintegration could look and how it might not be so positive.
But I think it feels like almost, I don't know if you would describe it this way, but like two sides of the same coin of it's important to have that distinction to understand one, to understand the other.
It's true. I mean, I know that Emma and I both have had experiences of addiction and struggles like this in our lives. And I've thought so much over, you know, my father's been dead for more than 10 years at this point. And I've thought many times about what was different about me compared to him. Why was I able to break out of this and, you know, in a vertical direction to move out of, you know, that suffering, and he wasn't. Yeah, it's tough. Like we seemingly had similar developmental potential in Dabrowskian terms, but we had very different ends in our lives.
Yeah. That's a good question of what makes the difference between, if you think about unilevel being the flat floor where any direction you move in, it sort of all seems the same, and multi-level is literally the staircase towards growth because you've got tiny little multiple levels going up. What's the difference between someone who spots the staircase and starts to see that there's a way up and someone who can't see it? It's a very good question.
And I think that's probably the important part of the theory hinges on of it's not just about are you disintegrating or not? It's what do you do when you're in that disintegration? And honestly, maybe the difference between disintegrating positively or disintegrating negatively or being stagnant, is an awareness, like having the language that the theory of positive disintegration gives you, having that, maybe what you both found in a sense of community or a sense of feeling understood when you learned about like giftedness and overexcitability, when you start talking about mental health in terms of all of it. That's just what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
I think it's relationships. I think that that's the difference. I believe that I was lucky in a way that my father wasn't, in that I had these supportive people in my life when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, that he didn't have. I had connections with people who really helped me see a bigger picture, to see outside of myself. He didn't have that the way that I did. And in the work, in the research that I've done, I think that that is an element that we need to talk more about with this theory, that the difference isn't necessarily within us,
right,
per se. It's the environment that we were raised in. And, not just raised in, but continues. Like, it's our social environment.
Yeah.
And we don't all get to have that. I just feel like when I look back, it was such a luxury for me to have so many people who were invested in me, who cared about me, who were willing to go the extra mile when I needed them. Not many people have had that the way that I have. And I recognize that there's a real privilege there.
Yeah. You're hitting on exactly the thing that I think about with CMM all the time. And I said to you earlier that the core belief is we're co-creating our social worlds and at the same time being shaped by our social worlds, because CMM is really a lot about like choice and our personal power. And yet I think we have to consider our personal power also existing within the context of a system that there's so many things outside of our control. And so it's understanding both of those working in tandem in our lives. Maybe there is, to some degree, something internal within you that was able to help you move into a positive version of disintegration. But also even that thing that was internal was probably shaped by your external world that you didn't choose, that you're saying you were privileged to have, that not everybody has.
I'm going to give you a third perspective on this, which combines all the previous ones. I think it's a combination of all of the above. So some people within them will just have that innate vision to start spotting the staircase, right? And then they're going to try and trudge up it by themselves, and it's going to be really, really hard. And they might slip back down. You might be in a situation like Chris was, and certainly I was with the previous disintegration I had many years ago. I came out of a bad relationship, and I consciously sat down with the encouragement and support of those around me to think about, what did I want out of life? What was important to me, before I get into the next relationship, what do I need to look for in a partner, and, have a real good think about what was important to me. So I had that supportive environment to be able to go through that exercise. And the process was being undertaken of, going up the staircase and thinking about, what is good for me? Who am I? Without actually knowing about the framework or having any of the labels on it. And then I think the third component is when you find out about positive disintegration and you have the name and the framework for it, that makes the journey up the staircase even easier, because now you have context of, these are stairs. I'm supposed to go up these, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And that can make the whole thing easier as well. So I think there are people that innately seek out the staircase or see it or spot it. but it's going to be hard work to get up by yourself. I think, some people get up it a lot easier if they've got a handrail to hang on to or someone to help them, but also understanding the purpose of a staircase and what the stairs are called and how you're supposed to use the handrail is enormously helpful. So I think it's a sort of three-pronged attack on that. And that is why I am personally so passionate about getting the theory out there, because we have this handbook, how to get up the stairs, and we're sitting on it. We know about it, and it gives you all the labels for the things, and it gives you all the, the framework for understanding what a staircase is and what it's designed to do and where you're going to get to at the end of it. We've got to share that with people. And it's a complex theory, and that's why Chris and I are really passionate about making it more accessible, and sharing our stories, to give examples, to give people that mirror to see themselves, so that they can resonate in it, because I think all of those components are really important. And if we have those, we're more likely to be successful to get up the stairs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The kind of funny thing I want to point out is that you said it's hard work. Like, those going up the stairs are hard work. But like you said, knowing it's hard when you have the access to tools that the theory gives you, knowing it's hard makes it easier because you expect it to be hard almost. It's like if you're walking up these stairs thinking this should be a cakewalk, when it gets hard, that might send you right back down the staircase. But like you're saying, it's just how many layers deep of these additional tools that help you climb those stairs do you have? Because climbing the stairs might look harder for some people than it does for others, depending on how many resources they have. The thing I want to point out to you both now is that I know I'd already mentioned that I see, obviously, both of our theories have a lot of different nuance, but I see the theory for positive disintegration as being something that happens internally within ourselves, this disintegration that happens, the self-reflection that happens, the personal growth that happens, that's all internal. And then CMM is almost the second step of that, which is kind of using that self-reflection to go out into your external world and make changes too. Because I see CMM and thinking about how we're co-creating the world, reflecting on our external world. You can't really do that if you haven't already reflected on your internal world. And so as you've both talked, I'm reminded of these three kind of guiding questions that CMM uses. And it's, how did that get made? What are we making? And what can we do to make better social worlds? And I just see such a parallel in the theory for positive disintegration of asking those questions, but in an internal way of, how did I get where I am? Where am I now? And what do I want to do in the future? That's maybe that process of disintegrating and reintegrating is a version of asking those questions of ourselves.
You're reminding me so much of the work that I was doing that brought me to the theory in the first place, which is, I was doing an autoethnography, and I took it very seriously as a personal research project. And what's funny to me is that I went into it thinking that I already had a pretty solid grasp of who I was and what I had been through. And so I was like, oh yes, I am mentally ill, and so that's what I was studying. I was trying to understand, how could I have been gifted and end up mentally ill? Like, I was trying to reconcile that. But what I discovered by opening my mind and using research methods was that I was wrong. And that, that it wasn't right to think of it as mental illness. And I discovered the theory, and I had this language that helped me, get to where I am now. But it has completely changed my story to do that. And so now I sit here and I'm like, well, I have a completely different story of how I got here and what happened than I did in 2014 when I first kicked this off. It's so interesting to me because CMM aligns so much with the research, the meaning making research, and in that kind of qualitative work. It's so cool.
Yeah, I kind of want to go off, Emma talking about saying, we have a handbook here of how to get up the staircase. And I think that's a metaphor version of saying, we have the Dabrowski Center, we have your podcast. And I just want to hear a little bit about what both of your hopes are through the work that you do, Chris, at the Dabrowski Center, through the podcast, Emma, through your YouTube channel, through all the amazing work that you all do. What's your hope for what this work can do in people's lives?
I think it comes down to the fact that because this theory isn't widely known, and it can help a section of the community, we really need to get it out there in as many spaces as humanly possible in an accessible way so it can be easily understood. I keep likening it to finding a needle in a haystack. So not everybody's going to benefit from the theory, but the haystack of humanity is 8 billion people. Yeah. And because it's something that talks about psychological tension, and because it talks about, these feelings of guilt and shame and your depression, your anxiety might not be a mental illness. It might just be a product of you going through a disintegration and experiencing this stuff. We need to, in particular, try and get into the mental health space. That's really something that I've been trying to get my head around. Well, how do you do that? Because when I went through my disintegration, I certainly wasn't Googling gifted education. Yeah. I wasn't Googling positive disintegration because I didn't even know the term, nor was I Googling overexcitability. I was looking at mental health services for help. The thing that I Googled that accidentally led to it was, why is my brain breaking?
Yeah, what are the chances of finding the theory from that?
Yeah, complete fluke, right? So I know that there are other people out there like me doing their day jobs, trying to grapple with life at the same time as grapple with what's happening with them, that need that information. Yeah. Like, they can't go through all the academic research papers. They're not going to make much sense out of like stuff in gifted education for, parents of kids with overexcitability, right? And that's exactly what drove me to create the content in the first place. But it's like, now we need to get that in the places where people are going to see it. That for us is the big challenge, and that's what we're hoping to do through the Dabrowski Center, is like try and kick down some doors that haven't been kicked down before, and get this message in the place where it can be seen. And we've talked about sharing stories and providing that mirror to people. It's like, now we've got to go hang that mirror on as many walls as humanly possible, because it's the only way it's going to increase the chance that the people who need it are going to have that ugly duckling moment and look in the mirror and see themselves reflected as a swan and go, oh, I'm not alone. Here's the thing. Lead them to the theory, and then they've got that handbook of how to get up the staircase. And I apologize because that was all in analogy.
I love it.
No, that was great, Emma. I loved how you put all of that. I mean, my hopes, I was just sitting here thinking, well, gosh, my hopes are very similar. But I guess what I could add is that my hope is that we can somehow empower people to take control of their own narrative, their own lives, but also kind of from a broader perspective, I hope that we can take control of the narrative around the term gifted, that we can say, okay, we're not going to let you academics be the arbiters of our experience anymore. This is a real, meaningful difference. This is a way of being that we needed to know about when we were young. And so let's start doing that, and to maybe create some kind of a grassroots effort where we, people who identify this way, make the difference ourselves, because it's never going to happen if we wait for the academics to do it. Like, we're just going to see these recycled arguments for decades more. So what can we do? So that's my hope, is to be some kind of catalyst, but also I recognize my limitations to some extent. And I know that I'm meant personally to be kind of a conduit for knowledge, to bring the knowledge together, to help people have access to it and the resources, and to do some community building. That's another important aspect of our work. And of course, the podcast has been a great way to start it, because, people find it, they feel seen by us and mirrored by us. And it's been so incredible to have this experience of doing it already with Emma. It's already exceeded my expectations. I just had no idea when we got into this how special it would be. And I'm really grateful that we've had the chance to talk with you about all of this, Abbie, because CMM and this podcast, I feel like you've done a really good job of getting us to talk about this stuff in a way that hasn't happened yet. So thank you.
I really appreciate that. And I think I just see so many parallels between the Dabrowski Center and the CMM Institute, my podcast and your podcast, because really I'll share that this podcast started as my like senior thesis project that I was doing in college. And I just decided I was going to do a podcast. I was going to pick a communication theory. So I opened up my comm theory textbook and I picked this theory for a couple of reasons, but all in all, kind of like Emma searching in the computer, why is my brain broken? I really just happened to pick CMM and happened to read in that textbook that, by the way, there's a CMM Institute. You can find it here. There is not another institute for a communication theory that exists. And so this opportunity for me to keep doing the podcast came when I reached out to them. And so it turned into more than this project. And it's just, I can just see it so clearly what it's done for me and what I would add to my answer, I guess, to the question that I asked both of you. My hope is that I can think of myself sitting in classes, learning all the information from all these theories that have to do with the psychology, that have to do with the sociology of, you know, all of these things happening inside ourselves and in our world. And I just want to be able to pick up that feeling that I got in a school setting and hand it to everybody else in the world. I see myself as sort of a translator, one foot in academia, one foot in, I don't know, like the secular world, to be the one to pass this information back and forth, to be what I see as part of that process between phase 1 and phase 2, which is going from just having the language to putting something into practice. So I'm excited about the work that you're doing with the Dabrowski Center. And I don't know, maybe it's a conversation for us of if there's ways we can further collaborate in the future, because I'm definitely interested in just learning more, because I even see myself as, you know, being in a phase of disintegration right now. Like I grew up with messages that made me believe that everything was very black and white. There's good, bad, there's right, wrong. And as I've gone further into my life, there's just so much gray, you know, is how I would say it. And so I want to lean into that complexity. I want to lean into having these deeper understandings of the way that the world actually does work. And that's a really hard thing to do. So it's this kind of deconstruction or disintegration of everything I thought I knew. And I want to, keep building my own toolbox, you know, including the theory for positive disintegration to help me get up those stairs. And then maybe as the way I see the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing is to be walking up those stairs, turn around and hold your hand out and say, let me help you come up these stairs too, to so many other people. And so I really commend you for the work that you all are doing. And I'm excited that I've gotten to speak with you today, because I think you've provided a lot of great insight and perspective that enriches my own experience of the world. And I hope a lot of people's understanding too.
Thanks for that. That's very, very kind. And I just want to hit back to something both of you touched on there. So you talked about being a conduit, Abbie, and Chris, you were talking about, being a conduit for knowledge. So it's almost like a Voltron robot, where we've got a lot of little robots and we want to bolt them together to make one big super robot, right? So you talked about CMM fitting on to the other side of positive disintegration, where it can provide those ways for people to be thinking about their autopsychotherapy and how are they going to behave now, and walk that talk, right? So, and we've talked about wanting to bolt into the mental health sphere. So when people are seeking that help, they've got a channel to come through, maybe find the theory, maybe help themselves, maybe then go on to other things. And I know one area that Chris and I are trying to puzzle around now is the more people contact us, sometimes we get things like, oh, is there a therapist in my area that works with gifted people or knows about the theory? And that's another area that we need to bolt onto this giant robot as well, is like, how do we get these tools in the hands of the people that are out there working with clients and help them get across the theory as well, so that they are equipped to help people who are gifted, people who are neurodivergent, people who are going through positive disintegration. So it's going to be a collaboration between all these components of us working in our little space and our own little lion robot, but then figuring out how to bolt all the little lion robots together to form the big giant robot.
Absolutely. It's a collaboration. It's a co-creation for sure.
Totally. Yeah, I'm very interested in collaboration, and I'm really excited about this, like about CMM and your work, because it's so interesting to me, like how these things just keep coming around. Like, I don't even know how to say it, but like when you reached out and I read the website and read what you were doing and then listened to a couple episodes, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's so resonant with what I care about, like from my work as a qualitative researcher, and knowing like how powerful our stories are, and like seeing how changing my story has changed my life has, like, I know that there's just so much more we can do with this. But part of the problem is that it's hard to convince people that you can change your story and that you can take control of the narrative.
Yes, that's huge. And along with stories, another big word that we use in CMM is talking about our patterns. And I think that's what's really hard. Like you're saying, you had this story in your head about what it meant for you to be gifted, or all of these labels that other people had put on you, and what you thought that meant for you. That was a story. And so part of your disintegration was writing a new story for yourself. And I think writing a new story for yourself is so important for everyone to do, because that means they've done some reflecting, they've done some question asking, they've realized, okay, meaning is not innate, it's created. So let me make a choice about what I want to create here. But yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad that you see those connections too, because I'm always looking for, things that resonate with me. I like to latch onto those. So I'm hyper aware of CMM resonating with me and the theory for positive disintegration as well. That's cool.
You've hit on something else innately, and that is the power of stories. I am like, I said at the beginning, all I have is my stories to share, and that's it. But the more we do the podcast, the more I understand how helpful that is, and the power of lived experience stories when it comes to explaining the theory to people.
Yeah.
It's really important to not just, have it as this cognitive. We've been talking about the power of emotions, right? You can't just have it as this intellectualized cognitive theory in the abstract. You've got to pull it down and make it applicable, and you do that through storytelling.
It humanizes it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I can't help but think in analogies, so that's really where I go, like first port of call. But there is some resistance in, like, accepting the power of those lived experience stories and saying, oh, well, you're just putting someone else's lens on the theory, and they're, anytime I think you go to a purist place of going, well, you have to learn the theory in an academic manner, and you're sort of invalidating the power of learning it through storytelling. That's kind of a harmful thing. So I think this is a powerful space to be in, because it validates what we're doing from the perspective of saying lived experience and connecting with other people and having that shared reality with them is a perfectly valid way about learning about these things.
Absolutely. And I think I'm glad that maybe that's even a lesson like you're learning, because early on I, hear you say, oh, maybe Chris has a better or a more academic explanation, kind of making your explanation or your experience seem not as valid as Chris's, but it absolutely is. Like, people come to this theory, and ideally more people will come to it, Emma, the way that you have now, because of how accessible you're making it. And I think that's great.
Me too. I think that's great too. And thank you for pointing that out, because it's exciting. So true.
Yeah. Well, I want to go ahead and start wrapping this up. And the way that I like to do that is using the lens of CMM, using the language of CMM to kind of contextualize and reflect on the conversation we've just had by asking, what does a better social world look like in terms of the theory for positive disintegration? And as I think back on our conversation, I'll go ahead and kind of provide my answers to that question. And I think part of that better social world in terms of positive disintegration is getting that toolbox, that handbook, whatever you called it, getting that to more people and sharing more of those stories. I think that's certainly a way to a better social world. So I wonder what all you would add to that from our conversation or from other thoughts you have.
The first thing that comes to mind to me is having a goal or a problem outside of ourselves. That is one of the important aspects of the theory. When people are at higher levels of development in this theory, they're not egocentric. They're they are putting as much effort into other people as they are into themselves. And so I think that that's a part of this that I can contribute. Is a better social world means that we are caring about our neighbor as much as ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think I'll touch on one of the other important points of the theory is authenticity, because when you're working on self, what you're building towards is being more authentic, more aligned with the values that you hold dear, acting in a way towards other people which is more authentic and more like you. And I think from a social perspective, working on making society a more authentic place, not only in our ability to express ourselves authentically and be ourselves and be different, and be accepted for that difference, but to look at some of the social structures that we've got in place, those guardrails, and question them, and have the ability to not only question our inner values, but to question the wider social, values, and say,
Absolutely.
what are we doing by forcing, all sorts of people who are arguably different shaped pegs into a round hole and cramming everybody into the same space. So that's another thing that I think that I would add would make a better social world, would be to give people the freedom, and the safety to be authentic, and the safety to be able to challenge the authenticity of the broader world.
Beautiful. Well said. Anything else you all want to add before we end our conversation? I've enjoyed everything that you've said so far and feel like it's going to leave me with a lot to think about already that I'm excited to spend some time ruminating on. But I just want to give one more chance if you got anything else you wanted to share.
I don't think so. I just want to thank you. I'm sitting here thinking that I'm really excited that we've reached a place where our story now, Emma, is that we're like these two people trying to bring this theory to the masses and help them see themselves in it, and, give them like the guidebook and to give them direction. And so, Abbie, thanks for helping us sit here, articulate these things, and help me have such a clear vision of that, because I think it's kind of a beautiful outcome. And I am feeling very grateful. And so thanks so much for inviting us to do this. It's been really such a pleasure.
Of course, I'm so happy to help.
Yeah, thank you. It has been great to be able to be in a space where we can sort of openly and freely share our stories. And Chris, you sort of hit the nail on the head that, that's what we want to do. And I think it takes a little bit of bravery to be authentic, to share stories, and even to challenge the way, with CMM, that you're communicating with other people. This does take a little bit of hard work. Yep. The spurs, everything we talked about today is, everything's hard work. And you do have to be a little bit brave. But I think the last thing I want to say to people is, you're not alone. There are people, as you said, Abbie, that will put their hand out to help you up that staircase. We are there to help people and give them a hand as well. And that, I guess that's the one message that I want to leave is, it seems scary to, be authentic, or to share your story, or to challenge the way that you're communicating with other people, or to try and make that difference in the world that you want to make. But you're not alone. And it's frightening, but there are people there that are going to put their hand out and help you.
That is all for our conversation with Emma and Chris. But if you want to learn more, check out their podcast, the Positive Disintegration podcast, and all of the other amazing work they do, all of which I'll link in the description. I think checking out their work is a great next turn from this conversation. Lean into your curiosity about this topic, and maybe their theory can help you to understand yourself or others in your life better. Keep thinking about how TPD and CMM can work hand in hand in your own life. What I really loved about this conversation is that we all learned something by the end of it. Like, we were different at the end of this conversation than we were at the beginning. Chris, Emma, and I were all able to use the conversation itself to help us even understand ourselves and our own hopes and goals better, and the shared passion that we all have for being those people on the staircase that are helping others up and equipping others to walk up the staircase themselves. Maybe you were able to clarify some of your own goals too, or maybe you got something entirely different out of it. Either way, I'm so thankful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation, which is hopefully just the beginning of one bigger ongoing dialogue with Chris, Emma, and the Dabrowski Center about how we can keep co-creating the better social worlds that we all see. As always, I get to do this podcast with support from the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. I'll link to their website where you can learn more about them and all of their initiatives. Also, the music for this podcast is created and generously shared with us by one of the stewards of the CMM Institute, Rick Spann, who is also a former conversation partner of the podcast from early on in season 1. Huge thank you to him for helping me to set the tone and add layers of meaning to this podcast through music. Finally, let's end with some extra next turns. Please follow the show wherever you listen, leave a review and a rating. Share this episode with someone you want to invite into our ongoing conversation, and connect with me on Instagram at Stories Live Stories Told Pod, on YouTube at Stories Live Stories Told, or on the website at storieslived.storiestold.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to do one or all of these. And thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. Until next time, I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.